I caught my mother's eye across the table and gave the smallest shake of my head. Don't. But she didn't stop. She turned to my future brother-in-law's parents, raised her wine glass like she was about to give a toast, and said, "This one cleans offices downtown. We're very proud she found something steady." My father laughed into his scotch and added that they'd stopped expecting much from me years ago. The whole table at the Royal York went quiet. My sister's mother-in-law, a woman who ran one of the largest commercial leasing firms in Toronto, tilted her head and studied my face like she was trying to place a photograph. "Wait," she said slowly. "Aren't you the one who—" She stopped herself mid-sentence. I held her gaze and said nothing. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I let my own family believe I scrubbed toilets for a living, while I was quietly building a property management company that, by that night at the Royal York, oversaw close to $500 million in commercial real estate across the GTA. If you've ever had to let people underestimate you on purpose, just to watch what they do with that rope, you already know exactly where this is going. I grew up in Oakville, in a house my parents could never quite afford but refinanced twice to keep up appearances. My mother, Linda, cared about three things: the country club, what the neighbors thought, and my younger sister, Brielle. My father, Wayne, mostly went along with whatever kept the peace at home. Brielle was 2 years younger than me, and from the time she was small, she was treated like something precious that might break if handled wrong. I was treated like the help. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because it's just what was true. When report cards came, mine went straight into a drawer. Brielle's got magneted to the fridge even when her grades were worse than mine. When I won a regional case competition in my second year of business school, my mother asked if I'd remembered to bring home the leftover catering. When Brielle dropped out of college after a semester to find herself in Costa Rica, my parents took out a line of credit against the house to fund it, calling it an investment in her growth. The year I turned 20, they did something I never fully forgave. I had a modest education fund my grandmother had left me, locked in a trust that released at 21. My parents found a way to access part of it early, claiming an emergency, and used nearly $11,000 of it to cover Brielle's credit card debt from a trip to Europe with her sorority sisters. When I found out, by accident, going through old mail looking for a tax slip, I confronted my mother in the kitchen. She didn't even flinch. "Family helps family," she said. "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." Then she went back to slicing tomatoes like we'd discussed the weather. I left for Toronto that summer with $400, a duffel bag, and a chip on my shoulder the size of the CN Tower. I worked the front desk at a gym. I waited tables at a diner on Queen Street, and on weekends I started cleaning houses for extra cash, because it paid better than anything else I could find without a degree behind me. My parents found out about the cleaning jobs, and somehow that became the whole story. Not the business diploma I finished at night, not the property management certificate, not the tiny one-bedroom I scraped together a down payment for at 24, just, "She cleans houses." It was easier for them to say at dinner parties than the truth, which was that they'd pushed me out the door with nothing and I'd survived anyway. For the next 11 years, that was the story they told everyone: aunts, neighbors, the people at church. Their oldest daughter, the cleaner. Meanwhile, the little maintenance and management company I'd started with 2 clients in my second year on my own had grown into Birchwood Asset Group. We managed retail plazas, mixed-use buildings, a couple of boutique hotels. None of it happened overnight, and none of it happened because I was lucky. It happened because I worked 18-hour days for a decade and never once called my parents to ask for help, because I knew exactly what the answer would feel like. I kept my company name out of anything that could trace back to me personally in casual conversation. Partly habit, partly self-protection. My parents weren't curious enough to dig, and Brielle was too busy being Brielle to ever ask a real question about my life. So the lie just kept compounding, the way lies do when nobody bothers to correct them. Brielle got engaged the spring I turned 33. Her fiancé was Jonathan, a corporate lawyer from a well-off family in Forest Hill. His mother, Patricia, ran Callaway Commercial Leasing, a name I knew very well because Birchwood had quietly outbid Callaway on 2 separate acquisitions in the past 18 months. I'd never met Patricia in person. I'd only seen her in board minutes and competing bids. My mother was thrilled beyond words. A wedding into old Forest Hill money was exactly the validation she'd been chasing her whole life. She threw herself into the planning with a kind of manic energy I hadn't seen since Brielle's 16th birthday, when she'd rented a hotel ballroom none of us could afford. The engagement dinner was at a private room in a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the tasting menu costs more than my first month's rent in this city. I almost didn't go. I told myself I'd skip it, send a gift, avoid the whole performance. But Brielle called me herself, which she rarely did, and asked me to come. There was something almost sincere in her voice, so I went. That's where the wine glass introduction happened. That's where my mother called me a cleaner in front of Patricia Calloway and her husband, and where Patricia almost said my actual name before catching herself, because she'd seen it on enough closing documents to recognize my face. I gave her the smallest shake of my head, and she read it perfectly. Whatever she thought she knew, she filed it away and smiled instead. "How lovely," she said, lifting her glass toward my mother. "It's so important to have a hard-working family." My mother beamed like she'd been complimented, completely missing the dryness in Patricia's tone. After dinner in the lobby, Patricia found me by the coat check. "Birchwood," she said quietly, not a question. I just nodded. "Interesting," she said, and there was something almost amused in her face. "Your mother has no idea, does she?" I told her no and asked her please not yet. She studied me for a second, then said something I still think about. "People reveal exactly who they are when they think no one important is listening. I'll keep your secret, for now." Then she walked off to find her husband, leaving me standing there with my coat half on. The next 6 weeks were a slow bleed. My mother called constantly. Could I help address invitations since I had the free time? Could I come early to the venue to help tidy up before the rehearsal because the planner was overwhelmed? Could I maybe wear something more appropriate to the bridal shower since people from Jonathan's side would be there? Every request came wrapped in the same assumption: that my time was worthless, that my presence was a favor to me, that I existed to be useful and invisible at the same time. I said yes to almost everything, because some old stubborn part of me still wanted to see how far they'd go. 2 days before the wedding, my mother called and asked, very casually, if I could lend Brielle a small amount to cover an overage with the florist. About $3,000, she said, nothing big. I told her I didn't have that kind of money lying around, which was technically true, since Birchwood's cash sat in accounts that weren't exactly liquid for a Tuesday afternoon favor. My mother sighed like I'd personally ruined the wedding and said she supposed she'd figure something else out, the same tone she used when I was 19, and she told me family sacrifices for family. The morning of the wedding, my mother texted me to arrive 2 hours before the other guests because the venue coordinator needed an extra set of hands, moving chairs and clearing a back room used for storage. I almost laughed out loud at my kitchen table. The venue was a restored heritage building on the waterfront, the kind with a 4-month waitlist and a coordinator who didn't do extra hands. I knew because Birchwood had acquired the building 8 months earlier as part of a redevelopment portfolio, and the events company operating out of it leased the space from us. I went early anyway. I wanted to see this through. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing that screamed wealth, because I still wasn't ready to detonate anything. I found my mother in the back hallway, already stressed, lipstick slightly smudged, barking instructions at a teenage assistant. She saw me and visibly relaxed. "Oh good, you're here. Can you help carry those centerpiece boxes? And honestly, maybe fix your hair a little before the photos start. We don't want you looking too casual." I carried the boxes. I didn't fix my hair. The ceremony was lovely. In the detached observational way these things are lovely when you're not entirely present for them. I sat near the back, not at any family table, because my mother had quietly arranged the seating so I'd be tucked beside an elderly second cousin instead of near the head table to make room for Jonathan's relatives. I noticed Patricia watching me from across the room a few times during dinner, her expression unreadable. It was during the toasts that everything shifted. Jonathan's best man finished his speech, and then the venue's general manager, a man named Marcus, I'd hired myself 8 months earlier, stepped up to the front to make an announcement about the building's history, something the coordinator had arranged as a nice touch for the heritage venue. Marcus thanked the bridal party, thanked the planning team, and then, gesturing toward the back of the room, said the words that ended my mother's evening. "And a special thank you to the building's ownership group, Birchwood Asset Group, for graciously waiving the venue's evening rate for tonight's celebration as a gift to the family." A few polite claps rippled through the room from people who had no idea what that meant. My mother's face did not move for a full 3 seconds. Then it drained, slowly the way water leaves a tub. Patricia stood up at her table, raised her glass, and looked directly at me. To the real owner of this beautiful building, she said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, who I believe has been called many things tonight, including, I think, a cleaner. A few uncomfortable laughs. My mother's hand found my father's arm. I stood because there wasn't really another option at that point. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I said that I was glad everyone was having a good night, that Brielle and Jonathan deserved every bit of this, and that I was happy I could help make the venue possible, even if my own mother hadn't known who to thank. I sat back down. The room buzzed with a particular electricity of people realizing they'd witnessed something they wouldn't fully understand until they got home and looked me up. My mother cornered me 20 minutes later near the gift table, her voice a sharp whisper. Why would you embarrass us like this tonight of all nights? I told her I hadn't said a single untrue word, and that maybe she should ask herself why the truth embarrassed her more than the lie ever had. She didn't have an answer for that. She rarely does, when it actually matters. Brielle found me near the exit later, mascara a little smudged, asking if it was true, all of it. I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment, then said something I didn't expect, that she'd always known something didn't add up, that she just never asked because asking felt like it would break whatever fragile thing kept our family functioning. I told her that fragile thing broke a long time ago. We just hadn't said it out loud. I left before the cake was cut. Patricia caught me in the lobby one more time, told me she'd be reaching out about a potential joint venture on a property neither of our companies could land alone, and shook my hand like we were equals, because by then we were. My mother hasn't called since. My father sent one text a week later that just said, "We should talk, and I haven't decided yet if I want to." Brielle and I have had coffee twice since the wedding, careful, tentative conversations where we're both relearning who the other person actually is. It's slow, it might not fully heal. But for the first time in 11 years, nobody in my family gets to decide what story gets told about my life. I do.